So, welcome everybody to our virtual workshop hosted by the amazing, wonderful Zach Brock and myself. And I want to start out with talking about something that I've been thinking about during these COVID times, where I've been in a really intensive time of musical growth and practice. And one has to ask oneself, why am I doing this when there aren't the concerts coming up that we're used to? And there aren't the opportunities to do, a real APAP, a real concert, all these things. And it's been a really good opportunity to think about my deeper reasons for doing music. And I've been doing a lot of teaching too. And this is what I've come up with. I think that music is extremely important as a discipline because you learn how to be with yourself in a very civilized, mature way. And I think every civilization, every culture, every country that has a humanistic culture worth preserving has arts that teach people to do this with yourself. I, like a lot of people nowadays, have a lot of ADHD. I've got a screen addiction. I'm constantly dealing with a lot of input. And my piano practice, when I came back to playing the piano 6, 7 years ago and wanted to explore it more seriously, started with setting a timer for 25 minutes. And I said for 25 minutes, it started saying for 25 minutes, I'm going to play Bach. And then over the years, it expanded into a world of other musical activities. So first, I got into this relationship with myself of spending concentrated periods of 25 minutes concentrating. And it's so rich when you're concentrating on something like Bach, something like bebop, something like jazz, something like Latin music, because these are very complex disciplines that are, it's not just, here's step one, here's step two. Reams of history, reams of tradition, reams of way to approach these things. I studied with many teachers over the past couple of years. Seymour Bernstein, the great Mike Longo, Dizzy Gillespie's musical director. I took a few lessons recently with Mark Soskin, Sonny Rollins' piano player. And But part of learning is really all self-guided because you have to be the one to decide how many lessons am I going to take from this teacher right now? Is this the right teacher for me? Do I want to continue on this path? It was particularly challenging for me because I was studying classical music, jazz, Latin music, world music, and kind of going on this and composing, and I was going on this self-generated path. And as I've been teaching, I've been seeing how valuable this is, especially when I'm working with teenagers, which I really enjoy. I learning how to play an instrument, you learn how to be with yourself. You learn how to balance yourself, how to be focused and relaxed at the same time, learning how to learn, learning to know the steps, how to break things into digestible chunks, how to look on YouTube in a focused way, how to look for different teachers, how to put yourself out in the world. And I say this a lot. I think the value of studying any art, passing it along, doing it with other people, even if we're not playing a lot of gigs, is it lifts us up from being a consumer. And this is so important for the earth right now. If we don't have something to devote ourselves to concentrate on, that's a deep, deep thing, a humanistic thing, a spiritual thing. We end up being consumers. I end up consuming movies, buying things, all these things. It's fine in its place, but I think the earth needs us to be creators, not consumers. So I really wanted to start talking about that. Zach, you have any thoughts on that?
Wow. Where do I start? I guess I would just say that I wholeheartedly agree with everything that you're saying. I think that has a lot to do. I mean, where you're coming from musically and as a person is how we've connected also as musicians. So I don't have anything to add to that, but I could just share what my experience of this past year is in brief, if you'd like to hear that,
Please.
which is that um, I was not a person who in 2020 experienced an explosion of creative feelings and making pandemic records and learning how to play three other instruments and getting six-pack abs and stuff like that. That just wasn't what 2020 was for me. It was really, really, really tough and scary at the beginning, and it took me away from music. Um, it was my light to come back. I think when things moved out of crisis mode for me, for my family, my wife had COVID early on and was quarantining here in our house. We had at the time 6-year-old twin girls. Now they're 7, and there was just a lot of fear and a lot of emotions that always want to avoid. And that was really pushing the music away. I think that how I found my way back was through friendships and embracing this technology that we're all using right now. It's been fun to sort of use it as a punching bag. In the past, it's like, oh, screens and screen time, and now how about that? That's totally out the window. What I discovered about technology this year was its potential for learning and teaching. But I've actually been participating more as a student even than I have been teaching. I've been teaching private lessons and have done a few master classes, but I've been taking a lot of courses, and that has just been something that before the pandemic, I never would have ever had time for that. I would have had time for maybe 2 of the things of the 8 things that I've probably done since then. And as I sort of replenished my, or expanded my portfolio of musical knowledge and inspiration, I came back to wanting to play more and to channel that into a disciplined practice. And I love what you said, Steve, about, how the discipline of being a musician and practicing music teaches you how to be with yourself in a humanistic sense, how to sort of exist with yourself in this space. And so, things picked up after my wife got well, and things by the summer, we were kind of getting into a groove. And I've just been trying out all the different things like all of you have, the different ways that we try to play together or share music and create videos, or lots of overdubbing, lots of learning how to use the technology that's been sitting around here in my studio for a long time. Now I've really got it going on. And here we are, and it's 2021. Things look like there's the possibility of something maybe better. And I know we've all got all of our fingers and toes crossed for that. And that's what I will say. And I'm just excited to be here with you guys to revisit this concert that we played, I think, probably 2 or 3 years ago, because I've noticed that the violin that I'm playing, I no longer own. I don't even have a violin anymore. Sort of looking like an old friend. So I'm
Nice. As far as the technology, everything has a plus and a minus. And what I've found from teaching on Zoom is I think it's made me a better teacher, because I find I have to be a lot more focused when I'm teaching online. There's something about being in the room with somebody. There's a flow to it, and it's you have to work harder, I find, to keep the flow online. I need to be more focused. I have to be more articulate when I'm telling a student what to do. So there's been an interesting plus side to that too. Okay, so So now I want to start talking about the project that Zach and I have been part of. We performed as a duo and part of a quartet. And when I was writing for many years for Dora the Explorer, the children's television show. And when that ended, I got back into. I came back to the piano and I said, this is what I started as a musician. I want to get back into it, and I want to see. I want to get deeper into it, and I started studying with classical music with the great teacher Seymour Bernstein, which was just an amazing experience. And for my 60th birthday, I said to myself, I want to try doing something that I've always wanted to do. What if I did a concert where I did something that people told me you shouldn't do, which is I played classical music and then wrote a bunch of music using all the musics I've been involved with my whole life: jazz, Latin music, Brazilian music, Eastern European music, and wrote compositions based on that, bringing improvisation into the classical music and kind of mixing it all together, which really is what I think the USA, and especially New York, is about. I mean, this country and this city is a melting pot. That's certainly been my experience in music. And that's when I put together the quartet several years ago, and was had the blessing to meet Zach at that time. And our bass player is here, Michael O'Brien, just an amazing virtuoso young bassist. Yeah. And Mauricio Zatorelli, the wonderful Brazilian drummer. And we did this concert, and it really had some great energy. We've been pursuing this project in various forms for the past several years, and a lot more concerts with the quartet. And Zach and I have been pursuing this as a duo too. My basic idea that I've come to behind this is that all music is what we call world music. When I went back to playing classical music, which was the first music I studied, grew up in Brooklyn, New York, I had an wonderful Austrian piano teacher who, like many people at that time, was a refugee from what was going on in Germany at the time. He came to this country that at its time had somewhat of an open door policy, and was able to find refuge here. And he taught kids and turned me on to this amazing tradition of classical music. And I would play pieces like the Bach French suites. And when I came back to them, I saw, oh my God, this is world music. It starts with an allemande, a German dance, and then there's a courante, there's a French version or an Italian version, and then there's a sarabande from Spain, and then there's an air from England, and then there's even a gigue from England or the north of England. And there was a cross current between English music and Bach at the time. After I was involved in that, when I was 17, I said to myself, this is crazy. I've been playing music since I was 4, but unless I am playing something that I've memorized or that I'm reading, I can't play anything. And that's when I said, what's the other side of music? And I got involved in jazz and Latin music. There was a big Latin music scene in New York at the time, tremendously exciting. The salsa music scene, I got into that, really loved the rhythms, ended up working a bit with people like Tito Puente, Daniel Ponce, and my mentor was Mario Rivera, who played with Dizzy Gillespie and Tito. And Mario was doing crossover, his version of crossover music. Mario was Dominican, so he was mixing merengue with jazz. And I think kind of jazz itself is a mixture. Everything is mixed. Yeah. Let's get to the music. I have 4 videos that I want to kind of play and then talk about. So the first piece is called Subindo. And the video that I'm going to show is, it starts with the classical piece that it's based on. It's a Bach 3-part invention in F minor. And I'm going to show you about the first third of that piece, and then launch into Zach and my performance of the piece that I wrote based on this called Subindo, which in Portuguese means going up, because I want music to be inspiring and uplifting, and that's what it's for. So I took Bach's harmonies, and they say good composers borrow, great composers steal. So I just wrote Bach's harmonies down and changed them around a little bit. I stole them, but that's okay. Everybody steals from everybody. That's the nature of creativity, I believe. And took his harmonies and created this piece where I took off from his melody, wrote a different melody. The rhythms are a combination of Afro-Cuban rhythms, Brazilian rhythms, and I put it into 7/8 time, which is an Eastern European thing to have these odd meters. So let's look at this, and then we'll talk about it. And really looking forward to questions from you guys too. Okay, so I'm going to share screen. And just when it starts playing, just someone let me know that you're seeing and hearing it, okay? And here we go.
Got it.
Do you hear it?
Yes.
Okay. Thank
Wow, nice.
you. Hey, so Zach, you have anything to say about that?
This tune in particular, it's cool because there's these two different sections that we improvise on, and one of them is a dialogue that's really just over a couple of basically modal, just over two chords. But the other thing, which quite clearly from this performance, I had no idea what was going on with the chords, uh, um, is a lot of harmony to go through, and it's yeah, that's the first part. Um, I I mean, I don't know, Steve. Tell me, how do you think of coming up with a song? How do you get the rhythm and sort of find the groove and all that? I mean, and actually, more specifically, on this tune in particular, did you think about how you were going to treat it rhythmically and then use the harmony, or did you work out a melody with the harmony and then come up with the rhythm, or did it all happen at the same time?
Okay, I'll answer that, but I do want to say that it's very hard for me to play that too. And it's been a process of many years of really liking my playing on this piece. That's why I cut my solo out. Because there's a bebop element to this music. Huh? No fair. There's a bebop element to this too that I am only getting my bebop chops acceptable right now that I want to be able to use into all this. So how did I write it? I I think I'm a pretty intuitive writer. So when I write these world classical music pieces, I really start from the harmony because I need some kind of framework. So I really literally write out the harmony from these pieces and go from there. And usually what happens is I'll start with a small section, and then I'll get a melodic idea that may or may not be related to the piece I am using as inspiration. So in this case, Bach's melodic motif is and let's see, mine is so I think I just went riffed off that boo bee bum ba 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 bee doo bee doo bee doo doo boo bee doo bee doo. So I'm kind of doing what he's doing in a different way. He's got these series of three motives: boo bee doo, boo bee doo, then the high one boo bee bee, and then coming down boo 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 boo. He's got that formula. I've got boo 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 bee doo bee doo bee boo 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 bee doo bee doo. It's kind of a riff on that. I've got bee doo, one doo, two. Then a little motion, ba 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 ba, bee doo, going up to the big one, and then coming down from that. It wasn't that conscious when I wrote it. I think I need, as a writer, I just need a springboard, but I need a clear springboard. I need a clear motif. Chris, you have a question?
Yeah, so you clearly go from the harmony, but do you consider the chord structure of the original piece, or like how do you keep incorporating the original piece
Oh,
into the new
absolutely.
piece?
When I'm writing, I have in front of me, I've basically written like a fake book version of the Bach piece. I just written down the chords, F minor, C over F, blah, blah, blah. I write almost like a jazz notation version of Bach's chords. So that's my guide. So yes, that is definitely a starting place. And then I have the melodic inspiration. And then I have a very clear rhythmic idea of what I want to do. And for this, it was basically like, this is coming from, could you guys hear this piano? Wow, everything's working. I love it. This is coming from my salsa days in New York. You basically play that for an hour or two. Everybody's dancing. It's back in the 80s in New York, right? Everyone's dancing and grooving. So this is not so different. But I just put it in 7, so we have a bar of 4 and a bar of 3. but with Bach's harmonies, or what turns out to be my version of Bach's harmonies, because once I start writing, the piece takes on a life of its own, and then I don't stick to Bach's harmonies. I just, it goes where it needs to go.
Steve, do you decide the rhythm that you want to be playing ahead of time, or do you let it just kind of organically happen?
Well, when I'm composing it, the rhythm is definitely embedded in the piece. The composed part of this piece. So that pretty much gives it to you, and then, but I know, having played, that this is coming from Afro-Cuban, and really the Balkan piece is just that there's an odd measure in there. I know that part of what, although it's funny, I don't play it that much like that, but I reference it, the whole.
It sounds like you almost, that the rhythmic part, the 7, was almost given at the beginning. So in answer to Zach's question, it seems like the rhythm was really there before you started doing all of the harmonic foundations of it. Is that the case? Or
Yeah. I mean, when I started writing, I decided I'm going to write, this is going to be a 7/4 Afro-Cuban with slight Brazilian influences thing.
So you're improvising on yourself.
Well, yeah, and all these pieces, this has an extensive, head. Like, jazz tunes, we have a head that's, usually the AAB, right? Right, so we'll play the melody and then we'll start improvising it. In this case, this whole thing, it goes through, it's long, it's a very long, convoluted composition that then we go back and improvise on. And that's why both Zach and I are not completely satisfied with our improvisations from, 3 years ago. Jennifer.
Yeah. Okay. So when it comes to improvising on a long progression like that, because that's a pretty long progression, and it seems to me that it would take, I mean, for myself, I mean, of course, I would imagine anyone, like, it's funny, Zach, what you said about, like, I don't want to hear myself and stuff. And so, like, to improvise really on that kind of progression, that kind of long progression, and to stay true to that progression, because, like, the way you played that in, like, the 4 or 8 bar pattern that you just did, that's a really amazing. And that's I love that idea. And I wish that people would incorporate these longer classical progressions more in this kind of music that's so rhythmically infective. It infects people, like it gives people joy, and to, like, add these long classical progressions to this is very what's the word? I'm sorry. I'm not prepared to let's see, what's the word? It's very empowering, or just it just lifts my soul to hear, like, a long progression like that.
It's also very difficult, and I have a confession to make. The more I play this piece, my solo is getting, but Oscar Peterson used to do this. In my defense, my solo is getting composed. Like now, after years of playing this piece, I basically on my solo I'm playing. See, that wasn't even really good. It's hard.
It was good.
Oh yeah.
And then I've got this. Okay, do triplets and then go to offbeats. Then do a bebop thing to change. Then this section, I start playing a Brazilian left hand, and I do this. So I'm starting to, even if all the notes aren't written out, it's starting to be a kind of routine. Does that make sense?
Boy, you really got to do sound effects in your playing for Dora.
Yeah.
Those were, I recognized the running footsteps just now.
Oh, that reminded you of Dora? Well, I think that's universal in music that wants to communicate. I mean, they did in Baroque music, they did painting with music, you know, so these intervals are painting. You know, in fact, that this three-part invention that is based on the original piece, you know, Bach, many people say this is about the pain of the crucifixion. Oh, and so these Bach's intervals were, you know, according to one school of thought, I mean, this is a very poignant piece. Now, Max has a question, right? This is my student, Max, that I've been really enjoying teaching for the past couple of months. Max, what's up?
How did you learn to improvise?
Oh, that's a good question. So, as I said, I was coming from a classical background. I started playing the piano when I was 4, and it was only when I was 17 that I had this moment where I said, this is crazy. If I haven't learned something or reading it, I can't play. And let me tell you, it's been a long, long, long process, because I think those of us who learn to play classical music, it's a connection between the eye and the music we're reading. And improvising is an ear connection. And I just kind of had to hang in there for many, many years. I loved, my way in actually was from salsa, the salsa music of New York in the 80s, more than through jazz, because I love the rhythms, and I love that you could play these patterns that are kind of improvised, like they're traditionally patterns, but you could do a lot of improvising on them. I was just more drawn to that music, so I was improvising in that tradition. But it's really been a lifelong process of learning how to do it, and it's complex. There were a lot of traditions behind it, and I have to say, I only really feel like I've really learned very recently, and through studying with, I think, the best jazz teacher I've ever studied with. It was Mike Longo, who was Dizzy Gillespie's musical director for many years. And
Wow.
Mike really got you, one of the great things about studying with Mike, he gave you a rhythmic pattern, and then he said, now play on one chord. And a lot of us who play classical music, we could play a lot of notes. We could play all over the keyboard, but does it mean anything? And, you know, the first thing Mike gave me was this, play this. What was it? A B flat minor thing, very simple. Now play on one chord. This is really embarrassing, but when I started studying with Mike, I couldn't really do that well, because it's actually harder when you're coming from a classical background. It's harder to do the simpler things that really rely on listening. Zach, what do you have to say about that? Zach?
How's my sound? Can you guys hear me? Okay,
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
better. All right, cool.
Yes.
Okay, I started improvising. Well, when I first started playing the violin, I started the way that a lot of people do, the Suzuki method, where you learn to play by ear before you use sheet music. And I think this is actually a great boon, especially for violin players, because there's so many other complications with the instrument. To be able to just concentrate on the sound and how you're making it, I think is really, really helpful. So I was studying that, and so therefore also studying classical music. I grew up in Lexington, Kentucky, which is a college town, and has a lot of stuff from all over the world. Bebop, world music, but also a lot of Appalachian music, of course, bluegrass, a lot of stuff like that. And I used to go to a folk group thing when I was a kid with my parents, and that was just a continuation of learning tunes by ear from people, but it was a communal thing where we would sit in a room with a bunch of chairs, and there was always a leader. It was usually this woman named Jean Ritchie, who's quite famous in the old-time Appalachian tradition, and
she would just teach these tunes, and I was just a little kid. I was there with my parents, but I was welcomed and encouraged to play around with this and try to find the tune and try to find the notes and then play, and everybody would get a turn going around the circle to play the melody and sort of do their thing, and then you pass it on to the next person. And so that's when I first started improvising, was just adding little, you know, a little turn here, a little mordant, or, you know, a little slide or something like that. And I was kind of getting positive feedback, you know, from people saying, this is okay, you know, this is cool, this is a safe space, and we're into what you're doing here. And there was something about it that just really, I always felt really free improvising, and I think I've always been drawn to that freedom. And so that was just playing, though. That was all totally by ear, and there was zero intellectual process going on. So as I got more into improvisation, one of the next, I think that the next big thing for me was learning the blues scale and how that worked. And that was incredible to me, you know, this skeleton key of American music that actually just works anywhere depending on how you invoke it. And that was like pure magic to me. And I was also, you know, getting more into blues and different stuff like that. By the time I was in high school, I was really into jazz, and I got to study. That was probably my first formal jazz lessons were with the husband of my orchestra conductor, who is a composer, and he was also a jazz piano player, Patrick Stoyanovich. And he was the first person to have me get the Omni book and learn what 2/5s were, and you know, figure out how to take vocabulary out of jazz solos, and, you know, why does this work on this chord? Oh, now you can transpose that to a different key, etc. That was sort of my first, you know, understanding things about jazz theory. And I went to college in Chicago. I went to Northwestern. I did a classical performance degree there, but I was also studying jazz independently, and I was going into the city and studying with as many people as I could. There's a great place called the Jazz Showcase in Chicago, which at whatever location it was in, I think, 3 different locations at the time that I was living in Chicago. That was where you could hear all of the world-class, top-notch touring bands. So, and also at the time that I was in college, I could still, you know, for a student discount of probably, I think, $12, I got to go sit 6 feet away from Kenny Burrell playing with, you know, Jimmy Heath, or, you know, things like that. You know, saw so many of the greats. Went to Johnny Griffin's birthday party and like ate Johnny Griffin's birthday cake with him. You know, stuff that can only happen in Chicago at the Jazz Showcase. That was also the first place I ever saw Brad Mehldau, and that was just, you know, how did that help me to learn how to improvise? Well, I was going to these people and I was just asking them for lessons. So, wow. You know, also when I was in school, there wasn't really the ability to do jazz and classical, and I don't really think that there is any real ability to do jazz music or classical. I mean, you know, as you were saying, Steve, when you're talking about your timer and you study something intensely, you know, it's more of like, you have to go for intensity of, you know, concentration and intention with what you're doing with the music, and then bring that to, you know, its conclusion. And then if you're going to do something else, you need to turn up that focus in the same way with that same intensity, and everything that it requires of you. So that's how I basically sort of cobbled together my formal improvisation studying. And as I said at the beginning of this class, I mean, I take classes all the time. I'm in a master class thing right now with Nathan Cole, the associate concert master of LA Phil, where I'm back to working on the Debussy Sonata and Bach, and I'm taking master classes with Mark Turner and Larry Grenadier and, you know, folks like that too. Yeah, Kurt Rosenwinkel. I've been going crazy, man. I've been going nuts. But yeah, that's my story.
All right. Very cool. So let's hear a little more music. Next, I'm going to play a piece called Maurice, which is based on a Maurice Ravel. This is a wonderful piece. It's called, it's the prelude to a whole suite he wrote after World War I, where he was an ambulance driver. And he, after the war was over, he wrote a series of music, pieces of music as a memorial to his friends who had died in the war. And this is a wonderful piece. It's the Prelude. And then I wrote another one of my world classical music pieces. I think this is the first of all these pieces that I wrote based on this. And here, I'm just going to play a little bit of the Ravel piece. You guys hear this, right? Oh, I've got to work on that part. So that gives you an idea about the Ravel piece. And then once again, I wrote down the harmonies, decided upon a rhythm, and just went. And I created this piece called Maurice.
Steve, can you turn that keyboard up, the sound on that up a little bit?
Next time I play, I will.
Great, thanks.
Yeah.
It's a lot of key noise.
Oh, sorry. Okay. Hold on a sec. Share screen. Yeah. Once again, please let me know you could see and hear this. Thanks. Well, I stopped the screen share a while ago, but I actually really liked the music, so I kept it going. So
It was getting so
there's a couple of
good. I
things
was
I want
worried
to
if it
say
was
about
getting better.
that. So this is another one of these world music compositions, and the funny thing about this piece that you really wouldn't get from hearing it is there's a really deep African element of it. So I want to get back to my studies with my jazz studies with Mike Longo. Mike was Dizzy Gillespie's musical director for many, many years. Just a great, great teacher. And I went to Mike and I said, I play classical music, I play jazz, and then I kind of hemmed and hawed, and he went, "Something's off, right?" And I like, "Yeah, something's off with my jazz playing." And Mike fixed it really in one lesson, and he sat me down, and it was a rhythmic thing because the rhythmic feel of classical music is really, really different from the rhythmic feel of jazz. And so we think of jazz rhythm, and the cliche is ching 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 ching. Mike sat me down at a djembe drum, and this is rhythms he got straight from Dizzy. And Mike taught me to play this, which would be ching 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 ching, and then all kinds of variations. So that is the African connection with jazz. Most African music is in 12/8 time. I should have practiced that. That 12/8 thing, the polyrhythmic thing, it could be 1, 2, 3, 4, 2, or it could be 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, all coexisting at the same time. So that structure is behind this piece, Maurice. Even though it sounds very mellow, very maybe Bill Evansy, very classical. Let me see if I could turn the piano up. Is that better?
Yep.
Little. Right, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. That's the rhythmic structure of that piece. It's mellow, so we play it that way. Michael O'Brien is here. Mike has played a lot of this music, and he plays it really beautifully. He's been playing bass with the quartet since we founded it. Mike, do you have any thoughts about playing this music? How it differs from playing classical music, from playing straight ahead jazz, Latin? What are your thoughts?
Well, yeah, that's one, and thank you, Steve. I appreciate the compliments. Yeah, I mean, I'm totally. I mean, what you were just explaining about African music and the polyrhythmic structure is dead on, and something that I think could be better further explored and taught in schools and education in general, especially with the music of the Americas from the Western Hemisphere. From top to bottom, there's that underlying current that connects everything from like Uruguay, Argentina to Canada. But also one thing I thought about, because we'd had this discussion before too, that connects also with the classical music aspect is that Ravel was Basque. He had Basque lineage. And in Spain, having been a colony of the Moors, of the Moorish Empire, they brought all the musical influences of both North and West Africa, but also even talking to flamenco musicians from Spain, that a lot of the Moors brought a lot of musicians from Bangladesh in India, and a lot of that, a lot of what they feel is the origins of flamenco music is the music from India and Bangladesh as well. And so, and you can hear, especially in the African aspects of the Basque tradition, or of the Spanish influences, Ravel, you can see kind of you've made like this kind of loop, this like full circle. And when you're talking about world music and aspects, I mean, I always have kind of spent my life studying, and I've come to maybe a conclusion, at least for now, that what I find in music and also in food are the two elements where you can really find a lot of human interaction and communication beyond all the political crap. I mean, it's like you can hear, you can have the political histories of the world, these people conquered, those people, whatever, but in the music and food, you really hear and see and taste and feel the way people just communicated with each other. Not in an aggressive manner, but it's like, oh, that's really cool. How'd you do that? What'd you put in that food? I mean, so in that regard, we can really, if we explore that, we can really get a much more richer sense of both how a human interaction and human communication over the centuries in a manner that's much more deeper than the kind of the surface political stuff that we always get taught.
I love that, and I think that's one of the things about the United States. I mean, this is a country of immigrants, and this is and New York is the epicenter of the mixture of cultures. And the American jazz is the mixture of classical music, African music, theater music from the late 19th century, early 20th century. Excuse me. Jennifer, did you have a comment?
Yeah, what Michael Bryan said. Hello, hey.
Hey, Jennifer, how you doing?
Hey. About like communication on a human level and how cooking relates to music. And it's like if a culture presents something to another culture that's pleasing, that culture wants to learn about it. And I think that's I think that's one of the reasons why music is such a great platform for that, sharing culture and to become more empathetic. Because if you see something from another culture that you might not be familiar with, if you want to learn more about it, you automatically become more empathetic to the person from the other culture because you want to hear where they're coming from.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
Yeah.
I mean, I've read that when there's been conflict in the world, Eastern Europe, a lot of the hotbeds of conflict, I've read that a lot of the time the musicians get along with each other. They're on a different level. They're not all of them, but many of them are. I'm not participating in this. I'm. What's that chord you're playing there? That's a really great rhythm. And it's one of the great things about, I love what you said about music and food. I think these things that are very grounded and very practical are a great way to connect people and transcend the political abstractions.
And what you just said, Steve, about music and food being a grounding element is that like, it just goes to show you that like, of course everybody knows that food and water and breathing and air and all that stuff is essential for our survival. And according to that, like what you just said, also music too.
Right.
Music can be as essential as, maybe not as essential as food, but also an essential thing to survive and to be empathetic towards others.
Absolutely.
Very much. Very much. Any other questions, comments at this point? Did Rob just... Rob Thomas is another wonderful violinist who's on this call, and Rob is also, we've played a lot of this music together. Rob, do you have anything to say about this music? I'm not sure if you're in a position, I'm seeing your photo, I'm not sure what you're doing. Okay, Rob's occupied. Yasha Hoffman says, music is a way to synchronize our bodies and our hearts. For sure. Can't get much more empathetic than that. Well, I think I'm going to Janet, did you have something? You have to unmute yourself.
Okay. Um, I was going to say on the last video you had, um, man, you know so much musical history. It was really a treat to be able to listen to it. You were talking about, oh, I can't remember which composer, but
Ravel?
listening to what you know about musical history, you're a true Yaley, I guess.
Uh,
But
thank you.
someone, a student would just learn so much richness from that. So thank you for that.
Well, thank you. I'm going to play one last video here. What do you think, Zach? Should I play George Henry or Mazur? I'm going to play. I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
I think I'm going to George Henry because I already listened to it and it's a really good performance. Mazur, I didn't listen to all of it. So we had another video already, but we're at an hour already. I don't want to go too far over. But Mazur was interesting. It was a piece based on a Chopin Mazurka. And I'm absolutely fascinated with the Chopin Mazurkas. They're in themselves. Chopin, in a way, it was without so much improvisation, though he was a great improviser. He was doing what I'm doing. He was he was writing mazurkas. These were artistic representations of or metamorphoses of folk music, and the mazur was kind of like our square dances in America. These were courting dances in Poland, and he wrote very refined, amazing artistic versions of them. Well, I'm gonna go with it because this is so interesting. This is another translation that I did. I think the video I'm going to show has me playing a bit of the Chopin Mazurka, and what I did is I wrote down his chords. I started from there, got a melodic idea. But rhythmically, I started with a very strong rhythmic idea. I took it to the world of the chacarera from South America, I think Argentina and Chile. It's another rhythm in three, very African influenced. It's like 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. It's got that African thing of you're playing everywhere but the downbeat, which interestingly enough, the Polish mazurkas were playing with this rhythmic idea of the downbeat also in their own way. So without further ado, I'm going to share this performance of Chopin Mazurka and then Mazur that I wrote. Let's see. Okay. Wait, give me a sec. This is my piece now. This is very chacarera. 1, 2, 3, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 2, 3. We're emphasizing everything but the one. 1, 2, 3. I just want to stop for a second and say all that was the composition. So that was the equivalent of "Embrace me, my sweet embraceable you," singing that whole thing through. It's a very, very long form, and now I'll show a little bit. We're improvising on the whole form. Blues, Americanize it. Okay, so that was Mazur. And any thoughts about that, Zach, Rob, Michael?
That's one of my favorites that you've done.
Oh, thank you.
You're welcome.
More. You stopped it. Ah.
Well, this is a virtual. I'm going to put some of these up on YouTube, and I'll let you know on Facebook because these
Please
are.
do. Yeah.
This is gorgeous.
I did the whole idea of leaving out the downbeat is quite wonderful, and that is present, especially in Latin music. It seems to me, most jazz doesn't go there, but it's mostly.
Absolutely. Well, does it in a different way. I mean, when I started really learning more about, I was listening to my jazz playing and going, why don't that Mike Longo thing, because I was classically trained, something's off with my lines. It was because I was ending them on downbeats. I was going, dooba 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 dow instead of dooba 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 dooba. And so that's kind of the way jazz does it. Or triplets. I was going.
Emphasize the offbeat for sure.
Yeah, right. Ending someplace other than the downbeat. It's interesting the way Africa does it as opposed to the West, because one of the things I realized about when I was playing a lot of salsa, it's the treble instruments that give you the downbeat, like the maraca, the shaker going. That's giving you the downbeat. The more you get into the bass, the more syncopated it gets, right? It's like in salsa, like an old Palmieri. How would he do it? Or just the typical. If there's an amazing recording I love from it was a cigar box set of music from Cuba that came out very years ago, and there's Cuban ritual music, Santeria music, and there's a piece for Eshu is just drums and vocals. It's what is going on in the bass, unbelievable. Jennifer.
Yeah, I was going to say that I had a theory for a while. It stands often. Sorry about the echo. But how the chordal instrument, it's almost like in African music as opposed to, and some Caribbean music and South American music as opposed to jazz, which is more Western. Just as opposed to jazz, is that the chordal instruments often have the obligato more often, and the bass instrument has the syncopated conversational voice, and that's opposite in jazz, where the bass has the obligato and the piano has the more conversational comping kind of role.
Do you mean by obligato continuous?
Yeah. Like in a lot of African music, the treble instruments often, and like shakares, maracas, stuff like that. Like a cowbells and things like that, they have more of the obligato pattern, and the bass has more of an improvisational, conversational role.
Yeah, I hear that. I hear
Yeah.
that.
I
think
mean,
as
not all the time, but often,
sure, no,
as opposed to jazz.
I agree. I mean, as a bass player, also, I mean, I think we both know this role pretty intimately. I've always found that sometimes when you leave out beats or displace beats, especially off the one, that's when you really get the groove happening. I think it seems
Right.
like the actually, because there, I mean, when you talk about, I mean, this could be like a couple-hour conversation right here,
Yeah.
but I mean, because like you have anything that's like distinctly West African originated is a timeline music. So you have the clave, which is the organizational principle, whereas like you talk about European music, then you have much more of a down, like 1-2 or a metered on the beat kind of thing. Whereas in West African music, you have the space of time. Everybody lines up on the clave in a different place. And as a composite, you have the composite rhythm that makes a whole standing back from it. And in certain ways, like when the bass, even in funk music too, you can think of like certain funk music. If you leave out certain beats, then things get really funkier. It's like the less you play, or when you omit places, things like really, because it implies a pulse. There's a concept of a pulse as opposed to like metric time.
Right, and you can have entire parts drop out, like,
Yeah.
like you can have bass parts drop out, you can have the chordal part drop out, you can have like no melody at all. And but here's the thing, the pulse is still happening.
Right.
And so it's
Well-
like this underlying sense of syncopation, and like where the pulse lies is what propels the music.
Right. And I
That's
feel like
the
sometimes when we
amazing
leave
thing
things
about-
out, it emphasizes the pulse, and it's interesting. It's
Right.
That's the amazing thing. The more I know about Brazilian music, you listen to Brazilian music, and it could be very, very hard to find the organ. It's so syncopated, it's very hard to find the pulse. But Brazilian music is all in two, and the organizing principle this time it's in the bass. It's the surdo, right?
right.
1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. That's the African part. And again, you don't hear the one so much. The one is muted. 1, 2,
Exactly.
1, 2,
Exactly.
1. But what's interesting is I think this is a universal music principle, even in classical music, because my classical teacher, Seymour Bernstein, has a motto. He says, downbeats are a trap.
Right.
Downbeats are a trap, because if you're playing classical music and you're playing, it's obvious you don't want to hear it, but it's if you get more to maybe going to the phrase to that last note on the 2, it's much more subtle. So I think ultimately there are universal musical principles that probably have to do with human biology, just the way our bodies are, the
Right.
way our hearing system is, that make the universal principles in all music. And it comes to balance, right? It comes to like there's the beat. We want to know where the beat is, but if it's all on the beat, it's boring, So we want to have the syncopation to play with the beat.
Tension release,
Exactly.
Tension release, yeah,
rhythmically too.
that's it. Well, this has
Have
gone.
in Indian music, like you can have a whole thing, and then boom, it resolves at the end of like a 16-bar thing or something.
Oh
You
yeah.
work it out mathematically, and it's like, tension release. Yeah.
One thing that comes up to me that's perhaps due to my age or something, I don't know, is that there's all these things to learn, and there's so much out there in so many different ways and different approaches and different cultures to absorb and bring into one's music. But finally, where does the personal come in? Where is the self-expression in it all, and how do you absorb all this and at the same time do something unique and new and something that's true to oneself, outside of any, or maybe maybe it is attached always to a cultural thing, but outside of that, it's finally you out there doing it, and where does that come in?
I think that's ultimately a balance too, like everything else. I mean, I don't think anyone in music could be unique because we're all working with the basics: pitch, rhythm, harmony. And once you start playing, you've got to be in a tradition, because even if you're going like this, that's Cecil Taylor, free jazz. That's a tradition too at this point. But I think it's always a balance, and I think there are cultural moments too when it's really, I think jazz probably in the 60s, 70s was more about finding your own voice. I think we're at a cultural moment right now with it where it's more about being able to recreate the history of jazz. And yeah, I think there's always going to be touch and go.
May I say something? My name is Jean Krausman. I'm 95. I studied with Seymour Bernstein, and I don't know a thing of what you were talking about today. My daughter, who's a jazz saxophonist, studying for a graduate degree at Montclair State University, and I think she knows somebody in this room, she mentioned. And yet, I have to tell you something. I was straight from the beginning of 4 years old to where I am now, and it's okay. I can't play jazz. I don't understand jazz. I'm not jazz. I can play cabaret. I can play a little of that. I was a teacher, and I taught them to love music. They didn't have a piano. They didn't know a thing about Beethoven or Bach. And I said, all you have to do is come to class. I'm not going to test you. You need it for graduation. I don't want to fail anybody. Please come to class. And I reached out like this, and I said, and I started with Bach, the little fugue in G minor. And you know what? They loved it. It was the first classical piece they ever heard in their lives. And you know what? They loved it. And you know what? I love them, and they're still in my life. And I'll be 96 in a few months.
Wow, that's
I
great.
want to tell you something else.
Wonderful, yeah.
The fantasy that I studied with Seymour for 3 years. Every note that I play comes from my soul, from my soul, deep down, from God. Call it anybody, anything you want. So I thank you all. I sat here for every minute, and I listened. And my daughter I'll go to my daughter, and I'll hear jazz sax, and she's talking about the 275 with a flatted 4, and I'll say, what? I learned first inversion was 1, and second inversion was 2. No more than that at NYU. Thank you all very much.
Gene, I'm so honored that you were here today. It means a lot to me. And something you said about it's ultimately about the soul is very beautiful, and I think that's the ultimate message we're saying is that all music is at one level. It comes from one place and it unites people, and that's the beauty of it. I was studying classical Indian vocal music for several years, and I was considering becoming a disciple to a guru of this music from India. And he was a Sufi, and I was a little concerned about whether I was signing on for a religion. And I said, is this a religious discipleship? And he said, and I really expected him to say no. And he said, oh yes, this is religion. And I said, what religion? And he said, music religion.
Oh, how beautiful.
Wow.
Thank you all very much. I learned a little, but a little is better than nothing. And when you do it again, keep me in your loop.
Okay.
Thank you all.
Thank you,
Thanks
Gene.
so much, Gene.
Zach, you have any last thoughts?
Yeah. Kit, I'll address, also the thing that you brought up. While I totally agree with Steve that our ability to, how do I say this? When we're using techniques and ideas and inspirations from music of other cultures, it's important to meet it on its own terms and to try to understand and learn as much of that as possible without adulterating it. where do you yourself come in? Something I was thinking is, and maybe Kit, you were inferring this, I'm not sure, but at a certain point, so much information, so much influence, and especially tradition, which has, tradition, it sort of has this sort of weight to it, can be something that can shut down creativity and self-expression. I've definitely encountered this with musicians of all ages, depending on their relationship to what they think doing the right thing is. So I think that there is the student part and the music lover part. I think that when it comes to what you do with all this stuff, it is a much more personal thing. And for myself, I choose to find that freedom outside of a tradition, or I would say kind of my own tradition, not to say that I want other people to learn my thing, but I'm trying to be true to myself. So I learn about all this new stuff. I learn about some new music from part of the world that I've never explored, and I get really excited about that. But at the end of the day, if I'm going to improvise a solo or play a song, I have to be honest, going back inside all of my influences, and basically what's left in imprint, So I think that was just something I wanted to offer there, is that, I wouldn't want anybody to think that, I don't have any mastery at all of any of this stuff that Steve is talking about. It's totally not my background, which is like, I think it's a constant excitement, for me to play with Steve. I have no background in Latin jazz whatsoever, even though there is a lot of violin in different parts of that tradition from Brazil and Cuba and all over the place. It's stuff that I'm interested in very much, but the stuff that I've learned about through the jazz lens. So for me to become a better student of that and go straight to that source, absolutely, is something that I want to do, and I want to expand and increase my musicality, my musicianship in that. But if I held that as a prerequisite, I would never have stepped into a room with Steve. I'd just be like, oh, well, I don't know, so I can't play music with you. And that's just,
that's fantastic. I get it.
You know what I mean? And that's why, back before the pandemic, when, there was, when world travel was possible, or whatever, just when you meet other musicians, we have an ability to come with our traditions, with our influences, but yet you can take somebody from Argentina and put them in a room with somebody from Tokyo, and if the vibe is right and there's a certain amount of there's a safe space and trust for them to just make some music, something's going to happen. And neither one of them have any, like, let's just say, for instance, that neither one of them knows anything about the other's musical background, So I think that's also something I just wanted to bring up, is that when it comes to being a creative musician and an improviser, you are yourself as important an ingredient as everything else that you're mixing in there. That's why people want to hear you. Otherwise, they could just go hear somebody else. If somebody out there wants to hear me, I don't think that it's like, I'm not a substitute for Dizzy Gillespie. I'm not a substitute for Stuff Smith or any of my heroes, right? But there's something else about me that's not in them. So I'm saying that in that I hope that is inspiring to all of you and to everyone out there that might see this, that we all have something special that we do. It might not be in music, or it might be in the way that we communicate a feeling or an idea or a type of enthusiasm, but there's something that each one of us have. It's kind of like our creative birthright, that
Absolutely.
It's our job to find it, and when we have that, then when we bring that to the table in an exchange of music and ideas, we illuminate those things in other people. I know this because this happens to me all the time from other people. You know, when I go see great concerts, a really great, like there's different levels of great concerts, right? You could go to a concert, for instance, and you could see somebody that's really just super virtuoso doing all this stuff, and you just kind of leave feeling like, man, I could never do that. I just want to quit. Or, oh man, gosh, I guess I should go practice. Then there's another level of performing where you go to this concert and in the moment you see something that is almost inconceivable or impossible, yet you know that there is something in you that could do something similar. And that's what I'm talking about. That part of your individuality, amplification of your individual spark, whatever that is.
And
Yeah,
that's
that's
As
beautiful.
as a teacher, that's really important to impart to students.
that's where the sense of empathy comes in.
I'm
You're
hearing
echoing.
echoes being crazy here.
What?
Identifying with other, like throwing something out that somebody can connect to, they can identify with. That's where empathy comes in.
Yeah,
Right.
absolutely. I mean, that's why they call it the universal language, right? I mean, cliches are cliches for a reason.
If we live in this world, it's because of music. With all the pandemic and all the vaccines or lack of, it's because of music. Remember that. Listen to me. Remember it. And keep doing what you're doing. But don't let me stop doing what I'm doing. Okay? Leave me.
Awesome.
And you know what I'm doing now?
What?
I'm telling people, pick up your telephone, call me up, and I'll play it through the telephone. And I play the Moonlight through the telephone. That's what I do now.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah.
I will call you, Gene. Well, on that note, I think we've had a wonderful session.
And my daughter did right. It was a lovely day.
Yes.
She was in here. I just saw her. So she listened to you also.
Well, that's great. Thank you all so much for coming.
Thank you, Steve.
Zach Brooke from Manhattan, from Montclair State University.
I believe that I did meet your daughter. I taught a couple of classes there before the pandemic. Yep.
Yep. She said, yeah. I know the name. Yeah. And boy, does she work hard. Does she work hard? Such a believer. But I'm a believer too in the Schumann fantasy last movement.
Okay. All right, guys. Thank you so much. I'm going to end the call. If anyone has any further questions or dialogue or anything, please reach out. And it's a great privilege to have you all here. Thank you.